Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you. My name is Tim Harris. It's 10 o'clock. It is time for 10 with Tim. We are going verse by verse through the book of Ezekiel. Funny, not funny. Man, isn't this something? We're in chapter 4, verses 1 to 17. Y'all got to stay with me now. Y'all got to stay with me. We've been through a pandemic together. We can get through Ezekiel together. Let's jump right in. I'm not making a joke of it. It's just I've been reading ahead and I know what's coming. So y'all got to stay with me. We're going to do this together. Actually, chapter 4, I really appreciate it. I think you're going to love it too. I know you've read it. You're probably wondering, what in the world? Again, remember, God has called Ezekiel to be the prophet to exiles there in Babylonian exile there by the river Kabar. And God lets him know from the start, they're not going to listen to you. They need to be told. I don't ever want anybody to say that, that nobody told them. They need to be told, but they're not going to listen to you. They don't want to hear what you got to say. And it's all bad. I can't say it's all bad. We'll get into that, but it's mostly bad. It's not anything anybody wants to hear. And so how do you deliver a message to people who don't want to hear a message? And that's where Ezekiel's really weird communication strategy comes in. He does what's called enactment prophecies. He acts it out. It's an enactment. Sort of like the old children's sermons we used to hear at church where you have an object lesson because you're talking to children. In this case, you're talking to stubborn, hard-headed people who don't really want to hear anything you got to say. So Ezekiel manages to communicate his sermon in such a way where people think, what in the world is that fool doing? What's that supposed to even be about? Most of what Ezekiel does is just out front of his house. And so people start walking by his house just to see what the fool's doing today. You know what I mean? It's like they don't want to hear it, but at the same time, they can't help themselves. They wonder, what in the world is he doing? What is that for? What does that mean? You understand? And once you get them asking that question, what does that mean? They're about to hear the message, whether they wanted to hear it or not. All right. So this is the first of Ezekiel's enactment prophecies. He's acting out a sermon, right? I love the way for Ezekiel, his whole life becomes the sermon. And so Ezekiel's first enactment prophecy, the first, like sign is that he's supposed to make this map of Israel, a map of Jerusalem. He's supposed to take these big, tablets of wet clay. What are we talking about? Just big slabs of clay that are wet. You take a stick or a stylus, something sharp, and you draw in the wet clay. I mean, this is what they did. And then the clay will dry and you've got, hard as a rock. You got the map, right? So you draw the city of Jerusalem. Now, I remind you, the city of Jerusalem is 700 miles away, but it's still where the interest lies, what the sermon's about. Draw out Jerusalem and then put it under siege, And so Ezekiel's supposed to build up little ramps and like take Legos and popsicle sticks, and sort of, wall in the city and illustrate that it's under siege. And then importantly, take a cookie sheet. Take some sort of iron griddle. It's a cooking utensil. Think cookie sheet. Take a cookie sheet and set it up in front of your face. And that way, it acts out the entire siege of Jerusalem. Now, that hadn't happened yet. It's going to happen, I think, 2 Kings chapter 25, when Nebuchadnezzar lays the city under siege. So it's a prophecy. It hadn't happened yet, but this is what's going to happen. And notice that cookie sheet that blocks Ezekiel's face. It's a way of saying that the city's going to be walled off from God. It's not just under siege from the enemy, but God's face is hidden. You understand? There's no calling out to God now. There's no hope of repentance now. God has turned his face, so you can pray, you can cry all you want, but it's just going to bounce off the iron, the iron face of God. You understand? It's that cookie sheet there that represents the fact that they are separated from God because of their sins. Yeah, that's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. So he's got this little diorama, this little, model of Jerusalem under siege in front of his house now. And people walking by saying, what in the world is that? And then they see it and then they have to begin to talk. And you know what I'm saying? Like they don't want to hear the message about Jerusalem going to be under siege, but now they see it and they're going to talk about it, and like it or not, they're going to get the message. See how it works? See how it works? But he's not done. So the next part, oh my gosh, lie on your left side for 390 days, and then flip over to your right side and lay there another 40. Now, we know that Ezekiel's like 30 years old. I guess it's sometime after 30 where if I sleep wrong, my neck can be in a crick for days. So I can't imagine what it would be to lay in one spot, lay on your side for 390 days. But understand, it's enactment prophecy. They don't want to hear the message about how their exile is going to last. 390 years. They want to hear that message. But notice it's interesting. Those sum of days, years, adds up to 430. 430 days that he's going to lay on his side, as the symbol of being in bondage, being in captivity, being in exile, being under the weight of their sins. Now, one arm is free. It's a sign of God's arm, being strong and mighty there. But understand, 430 days. Is that number familiar to you? Because we read the book of Exodus together, right? Exodus chapter 12, verse 40 tells us that the captivity in Egypt, the slavery in Egypt lasted for exactly how long? 430 years. You see, so this is that number of judgment, that number of captivity. They would know that from the Exodus, right? But in this case, the numbers add up again. If you add up the numbers of years of northern captivity, the northern kingdom, and in the southern kingdom, Israel and Judah, 430. But again, the point is, Ezekiel's going to lay on one side for that amount of time. They're going to tie him up with ropes. Now what? And then it goes on. Not only is it going to be under siege and captivity, but there's going to be famine. And to illustrate the famine, Ezekiel makes some really pretty bad bread. It's just kind of out of random grain and beans and lentils, and that's the point. It's like make do. The famine will be so severe that people are going to make bread out of, cat litter and, bird seed and anything you can find. And that's the point. This isn't a recipe that's supposed to make you want some of this. I know people make Ezekiel bread and it's lovely, but it ain't what he's having here. This is to illustrate the desperation of people who make a meager lump of bread out of whatever they can find in coffee cans in the garage, any kind of seed, any kind of lentil, just put it all together, try to make some sort of cake out of it. And this is what Ezekiel's going to do the whole time he's laying on one side. He'll eat these meager rations of terrible, bread and just sips of water. It's to illustrate the famine. And again, it's going to happen. It will happen in Jerusalem. And again, I remind you, Jerusalem is 700 miles away. We're going to come back to that. But this is Ezekiel's style of preaching. Now, let me just say one thing, because I've struggled with this. Are we supposed to assume that Ezekiel literally, laid out front of his house on one side, tied up, for, 13 months, and then flipped over and did it for another month and a half? Is that what we're supposed to understand? And I've decided no, and you and I can disagree, but I'm just reading ahead, and everything in the book of Ezekiel that happens from like chapter 1 to the beginning of chapter 8, like chapter 8 verse 1 gives us another like timestamp. And everything that happens in chapters 1 through 7, it all happens in the space of a year. So it is not that Ezekiel lays in one spot, literally for 390 days. Because obviously he's expected to get up and make his bread every day, and he's going to preach other sermons and do other things. I guess it's kind of like if you say, man, Pastor Tim preached through Genesis for 3 months. Well, I did. I also did other things, and so Ezekiel, he would come back to this. Perhaps he would be out in front of his house, every day, acting this out for that period of time. But I don't think, from reading the book, I don't think that he literally lays there, for a year and a half. I just don't think so. I may be wrong, but like I say, chapter 8 gives me another timestamp, and everything else that happens in these chapters, Ezekiel's is up moving around, and it all happens in the space of that first year. So I don't think so. It doesn't take anything at all away from the power of the amazing drama of Ezekiel's style of communication. This is the way God gives him the word, and this is the way that he delivers the word. It's a sermon lived out in his own life. That part about cooking your bread over a fire made with burning human dung. Yeah, it's disgusting, but that's the point. The people will be so hungry. But notice how Ezekiel, the priest's son, Ezekiel says, no, I can't do that. Hungry or no hunger, I can't defile myself. And so God then relents and allows him to cook it over cow dung, which was more common in the Middle East, even in Ezekiel's day, even in our day. It's just that picture of one who, no matter what, is going to stay pure, is going to try his best to be in the world but not of the world, even in times of desperation, trying to, live up to his own convictions. Like I say, I love the way Ezekiel's whole life becomes a sermon acted out. We'll come back to this tomorrow. Ezekiel's going to give himself the world's worst haircut in the pulpit tomorrow in chapter 5, verses 1 to 17. Let's keep talking about what it means to act out your sermons, to live out your sermons. And let's continue to explore why it is that the topic of these sermons has to do with Jerusalem, which is 700 miles away. We'll come back to that tomorrow. So stay with me. Stay in the Word. Tomorrow, chapter 5, verses 1 to 17. Lord willing, I'll see you at 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim. Have a good Wednesday. I love you guys.